Hello and welcome to this episode of Akrinos Access. I'm your host, Eric Matei, joined today by Elizabeth Kiesgen. Elizabeth is the principal and founder of Kiesgen Eyecare Talent Partners, and she's joined us here in this episode of Access for a fascinating look at the world of doctor recruiting. So y'all, this is actually the first of a multi-part series that Liz is going to be joining us here on Akrinos Access, as we're really wanting to dive into all the different aspects of recruiting doctors through the lens of perhaps new doctors starting their career, finding a practice to call home, as well as doctors that are looking to find that right candidate to bring on in. But in this first episode, we're calling it Doctor Recruiting 101 because Liz is just going to kind of give us an overview of exactly what is all encompassed in the world of doctor recruiting. But first and foremost, wanted to, again, thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us here on this episode of Access. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, super excited to have the opportunity to talk doctor recruiting.
So let's go ahead and jump into it, right? As we're talking Doctor Recruiting 101, and to kick off this mini-series, Liz, why don't you start by just defining exactly what is meant by recruiting and what all this area encompasses?
Absolutely. So the area of recruiting is much broader than most people think. Just off the bat, hearing recruiting, somebody might say, "Oh, well, that person's a headhunter." I hear that a lot. We certainly do more than just headhunting as a recruiter working in the recruitment industry. So recruiting means matching a candidate, a doctor candidate, with the right practice for them. And that involves a lot more than just interviewing and such. It's working with that candidate, figuring out what are their goals? Where do they want to go professionally? It might involve looking at their CV, doing a little interview, mock interviews and things like that to help them polish their interview skills. It involves contract negotiation, talking salary, researching different areas of, if they settle on a certain area geographically. Okay, well, let's see what the salary looks like in that market. Let's see, what the opportunity really is, and match the opportunity to the goals of the doctor. Because without matching the goals of the doctor with the opportunity, the longevity is just not going to be there. You want to create a relationship between practice and doctor that's going to be lasting. So that's all included in that recruitment process.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring up this matching piece because it's so critically important. And I think, and we'll probably get into this as our conversation unfolds here, but when we look at the retention struggle that many businesses have, yeah, I think a lot of it ties back to they're missing that first step, which is the match. And that is, we need to define and understand exactly what these goals are of both the applicant, but also, right, the goals of the hiring party as well. What are their goals and objectives in finding what that ideal candidate is going to look like? Really, really powerful stuff. And I think also it's fascinating that you mentioned that in the context of the matching, there's a variety of things that are pulled into it. Not only the goals and the career aspirations, but also, we start looking at salary expectations, geography, location, perhaps clinical interests as well, right? It all ties back to how are we going to ensure that match?
Yes.
And I think that leads us to the next piece here, as we're looking at the retention side of things. I know that's something, I had a conversation just recently about this whole piece of retention and keeping doctors on board. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that as well. It's like, the significance of recruiting and retention strategy in kind of this modern practice environment.
Yes, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, the goal aspect, not skipping that first step in really understanding what both parties want and making that right match. That's where you're going to have your success down the road with retention, as you mentioned. As far as recruiting goes, you don't want to, as a practice, find a candidate too hastily. or kind of jump into something because you really need doctor coverage. And trust me, I've been working in eye care in the practice setting where it's like, we really need another doctor. But it's important to not speed the hiring process along or the recruitment process along too much that you skip over those important steps, such as matching goals, making sure that both parties are getting what they want, so that 5 years down the road you don't have a conversation of, well, this opportunity really isn't what I wanted long term. Okay, but if we would have backed up a little bit in the process earlier on, we would have caught that. So those are things that I really put a lot of emphasis on when I do recruitment for various clients. You really want to find that right person, even if it takes a little bit more time. It'll pay off more in the end, having that doctor stick around with you.
Yeah, I would say that is a really powerful statement, Liz. As you know, in Akrinos, we work with practices at all phases of their practice life cycle. And I know a big critical piece for doctors, particularly when they're cold starting, right, is there's no need to rush that first hire, right? I mean, you do better being perhaps a little short-staffed, waiting for someone that's going to be the right candidate rather than speeding the hire just to get someone in the seat only to find out that they don't align in vision, they don't align in objectives and kind of long-term goals. So to that end, Liz, why don't you maybe help us understand exactly what the recruitment process looks like? Just kind of some of the basic steps that everyone is going to be going through in this recruitment process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you kind of from both perspectives, from the client practice perspective and also from the doctor candidate perspective. So first, it's working with that practice to really understand what they need. What coverage do you need to make your business successful at this time? Of course, you want to add enough coverage where you are seeing the patients that you need to be seeing and serving the patients that you need to. But at the same time, you don't want to add too much coverage too quickly because then you'll have that gap period of not having that doctor quite busy enough for it to make sense for the driving revenue for your practice. So that is a conversation you have up front to really understand that. My sweet spot that I think adding a doctor is key is when the doctor starts to book out 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. You want to start looking or consider somebody maybe part-time. If you are booking out a month to a month and a half, okay, well, maybe we need to talk about a full-time doctor ad and what that might look like to your practice. So it's working out the details of that opportunity early on, working out the offer, making sure that the offer makes sense for the practice, but also is competitive for the market that we're in right now. Salary, benefits, bonuses, all of those things. Work that out, write a job description, and then it's go time for recruitment. So that means job posting, that means individual reach outs, networking, all the things that you do to get a lot of conversation around that opportunity. And then we find that person that matches the goals of the practice. We work with them, review their CV, we do an interview, really understand what that person is looking for. And if the two match, wonderful. If they don't, you keep looking. And so sure. that's where the key is. It's like, okay, don't get discouraged if we don't find the right match right away. We will, but it's worth the time. But anyway, finding that candidate and then getting them together for an interview, and then the practice kind of takes it from there. How they want to do a contract negotiation, salary negotiation, are all things that I can help with as well. But that's kind of how the process goes. And then from there, it's contract signing and happy days with another doctor.
That's it. I think, and thank you for providing kind of that play-by-play, right? Like what these steps are. I do want to point back to really how you kicked it off, which I know in prior conversations we've had, from my standpoint, is the most critically important, and that is looking at the analytics, right? Yeah. And realizing what is the need. Is the business currently cash flowing sufficient to be able to hire in this associate doctor, right? And then in so looking, is it appropriate to have them come in as a part-time or as a full-time? Because at the end of the day, it's all about how the business is going to be cash flowing moving forward. It's really fascinating when you start to dig into it also and to build on some other things that you mentioned, right? Assessing exactly what that offer is going to look like, salary, benefits, jumping into constructing an engaging job description and a thorough, detailed job description as well, right? Before jumping into finding a prospect and then jumping into that interview process. So to that end, then, Liz, when we look at this process, I know you mentioned kind of earlier in our conversation, it's important not to rush things. What is the time commitment? I mean, from start to finish, if we've got a viewer out there right now, it's like, hey, I am booking 2, 3, 4 weeks out. I am, depending on the time of the year, I am thinking that the year to come, I should be looking at bringing in an associate. From the time someone's like, hey, I'm ready to get started with this through, wow, now we have our new doctor in here seeing patients. What does that time horizon look like?
Yeah, that timeline can really vary, but as kind of a general average, I would say the turnaround is about 90 days. And that is from, like you said, the moment you reach out and say, hey, I'm ready for a new doctor, to either when a contract is signed and you've got a start date in mind or that start date itself. So that gives enough time to really get a lot of exposure to the job and talk to multiple doctor candidates before you settle on just the one that you're looking for. And to add to a little bit what we talked about earlier, strategy of part-time versus full-time, you can get really creative with that. You can have a doctor come in a day every other week, or maybe if you're really busy on Saturdays and you want to have just Saturday doctor to start with, those are all options to gradually build up your practice. It doesn't have to be the shock of a full-time doctor. And then on the flip side, from a candidate perspective, most are looking for that full-time job or maybe a little supplemental something on the side. So you have to think about too, from their perspective, what's going to be the most attractive. So there's a balance between both. And that's where the sweet spot is for both the practice and the candidate.
Outstanding. So let's now maybe look at this through the lens of this 30,000-foot view of the business. Maybe if you can share, some of your perspective on the role of a recruitment and retention strategy, and really the impacts to different aspects of the practice, right? So, like, we think the impact of the value and patient experience, certainly impact on operations and workflows, profitability.
Absolutely. So, patient satisfaction is going to significantly increase when you have enough doctor coverage in your practice. Wait times are going to be lower. You're going to be able to see more emergencies, more add-ins as you can. You'll have coverage for those dark days. So, you want to go on vacation to Hawaii for a week and you need some coverage in your practice. Having that second doctor being able to cover the practice so that you're not dark is a huge impact on your patients. So just having that accessibility increase, and revenue, and that kind of goes without saying. Increased revenue, you'll have more patients being seen, which will generate more revenue to your optical for glasses, contacts, just exams, all of it. But the balance of not adding too much, again, is in there too. So that's where you assess it. But absolutely, from that perspective is great. From the staff perspective as well, if you want to grow, you're looking to kind of take your practice to the next level. Adding that doctor really pushes the staff as well to learn from another doctor, to gain that experience, and that'll help them grow as well as eye care professionals.
Yeah, and it's really exciting to see with where we are now as an industry and this growing scope of care. Right. When we're talking about the patient experience, value to the patient, we're talking about driving revenue and enhancing profitability. It's really cool. I know we were talking about this prior as well, right? We have this up and coming generation of younger doctors that have this radically expansive scope of care. And when we see getting these doctors into practices where perhaps the legacy doctor did not develop some of these specialties, how it can complement the business and really accelerate the growth. As a matter of fact, as I'm sharing that, I'm thinking a couple of Akrinos clients right now that in the last couple of years have brought on an associate, and now to see these associates launching their specialties in these businesses,
Yes.
wow, tremendously impactful to the profitability of the business, right?
Absolutely.
So a lot of really great insights here, Liz, as we're talking about this whole world of doctor recruiting 101. And before we wrap up this episode, perhaps you could share just some tips and best practices, for those that are kind of going through the process or perhaps considering the process in the next 6 to 12 months. What are some tips and best practices they can pull into their thinking and their approach as they embark on it?
Yes, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, really take a look at your appointment book. That's where it's kind of all going to originate is in gathering that information. But also, think about what you want for your practice 5 years from now, even 10 years from now, what you want that to look like. Are you looking to retire maybe in the next 5 years? You want to have lead time for those kinds of big transitions. And the more lead time you have, typically the smoother the process goes in finding somebody that's right to take over, all of those things. So just dependent on the situation. But you always want to be as far ahead of it as you can. Really, that is what is going to set you up for the most success for finding the right person. That being said, if you decide 2 years, I want to retire, you can make that turnaround in that amount of time. Certainly. But just kind of assessing the goals for your practice and what you want long term.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, this has been tremendously insightful, and this is just the first of what is going to be a multi-part series we're doing. So to our listeners out there, be sure to tune in to some upcoming episodes, and we're going to be reconnecting with Liz, talking about this recruiting process from different perspectives, right? So our next episode is going to be from the perspective of that doctor who's just graduated, launching their career. And then we're going to do another episode on down the line that's looking at it through the lens of that hiring practice. But Liz, before we wrap up this episode, to our viewers out there that would like to connect with you, perhaps learn more, or even connect with you, how can they go about learning more about your world?
Absolutely. Well, feel free to reach out. I love talking everything recruiting. So reach out to me, give me a call. Email, visit our website. Our website really outlines all the services that we provide, as well as some experiences and reviews from those who've worked with us. But I really look forward to hearing from you and looking forward to another episode of Akrinos Access.
Absolutely. Likewise, Elizabeth. So y'all, as you're embarking on this process as a new doctor, looking for an opportunity, or an established doctor that owns a practice, looking to hire someone in, or anywhere in between, be sure to head on over to kiesgenetp.com to learn more about that recruitment process and how Elizabeth and her team can perhaps help you bring that vision to reality. And as you are going through your business life cycle, head on over to akrinos.com. We've got an amazing portfolio of solutions and advisory to help you make it happen, starting, scaling, and transitioning a modern optometry practice. So, Liz, look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Access.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.